Coming up on Kentucky Outlook, Ebola and getting a better night's sleep. Last March, a half a world away, what began with a handful of cases in Guinea quickly spread to neighboring Sierra Leone and Liberia. And now hundreds of people are dead in what the World Health Organization is calling the most virulent of diseases, Ebola. We're going to take a closer look at that with an infectious disease specialist. And later in the program, are you getting enough sleep? We're going to find out about the health ramifications of sleep deprivation. That's next on Kentucky Outlook. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Kentucky Outlook. I'm your host, Barbara Deeb. You know, we are talking heads on a mission, and our mission today is to clear up some of the myths and misconceptions about this thing we call Ebola. It's sweeping parts of our world. Do we here in South Central Kentucky really need to worry about that? We're going to find out as we welcome to the program Dr. Rebecca Shadowin, who is an infectious disease specialist with the medical center. In addition, you do travel medicine and lots of other things. So we know you're a busy person. We appreciate your taking the time to be with us here today.
Happy to be here.
Well, before we got started, we were talking about information is power. And in this case, an informed public really does make a big difference. The CDC actually has a campaign in that regard.
Indeed, that's true. Panic will not help you at all when you have something you're worried about. Knowing how you can protect yourself and your family is the most important thing you can do.
Well, let's talk about Ebola, and then we have several other things to talk about. The intervirus D68, which is affecting some young people. In addition, we have antibiotic resistant viruses that are cropping up. But let's start with Ebola. We're hearing a lot about it. We have another case that's that has arrived at Emory in Georgia. So what is Ebola?
Ebola is a filovirus. It's a virus that normally lives in monkeys. That's the reservoir. And it has developed the ability on occasion to jump species, we call it, meaning it going from an animal species to a human species, although some of us consider humans animals as well. But it has done that. And not an uncommon thing. The flu virus does that. Pigs and fowl or birds are the intermediate host for the flu virus, but it jumps to the human species as well.
Well, and we see this, some of the first cases were found back in 1976, so it's not a new disease, but we're hearing more about it all of a sudden. Why that?
Because it's being spread. We've had more than one episode of Ebola on our planet, but they've all been contained. This one has not been contained, and so now we have several people who have died from it, and in many cases, a little over 2,000.
And when we talk about its origins at this point, the more recent cases, we're talking about Guinea, we're talking about Liberia in Western Africa, and you and I were chatting before we got started, what people may not realize, the conditions that exist there in the medical field.
Right. You have the perfect storm. You know, there are various ways to get Ebola virus. One is by eating bushmeat, which is a term used for those people who go out and hunt their food. And that still happens in many places, out of need or out of sport, either one. But if you happen to get a primate that is infected with Ebola, then the chances of catching that, if it can jump species, increases. But
even if you cook those things, even if they're out in the bush and they were to cook it's
right.
Still, it's the kind of
No,
virus.
the virus will be killed with heating, but you have to prepare the meat. So if the virus is present in the blood and the saliva and the meat, and you have to strip the meat and you have to get the meat out and you have to cut the meat, the chances of that being aerosolized and inhaled or a cut in your skin is just very high, and so you can catch that from preparing the meat, basically. But then once it has been transmitted to an individual, the perfect storm occurs when you can't contain that individual, and so family members or cultural differences that we see in how we handle our families or our deaths or how our hospitals can contain things become a real problem, and that's what we see in Liberia and Sierra Leone.
And what you're
Guinea.
specifically talking about is different cultures. You know, as you say, we treat our sick in different ways.
Right.
The West African culture might be more inclined to touch and care for, and in so doing, it's the body fluids is how this is transmitted?
It is, which is not different than a number of things. Infectious mononucleosis or Epstein-Barr virus is transmitted that way. Parvovirus, which is fifth disease in children. The influenza virus from human to human is transmitted that way. They, however, do not cause us to have bleeding. Hemolysis, we call that. This is a hemorrhagic fever virus, which means it selectively destroys our ability to clot our blood.
Okay.
And so we bleed. And you can only bleed so much before we lose the patient. So supportive measures are very important, and even in those cultures, they don't have the supportive measures that we have here.
So let's take a closer look. We're here in South Central Kentucky, you're watching this and you're thinking, Ebola, really? Bowling Green? Glasgow? Could it happen here? Could it happen here?
Well, certainly, we're a global economy. Friday night, I had a call from the emergency room for a patient who had traveled from Nigeria, where a few selected cases have occurred in one pocket, to visit their new grandchild because their daughter lives here in Bowling Green. And of course, they had fever and didn't feel well and wound up in the emergency room. So could that have been? It did not meet a case definition and wasn't, but yes, there is no reason why any particular city in the United States couldn't see a case of Ebola.
And there's no vaccine as we speak for Ebola.
There are 2 being studied, but currently available there are none.
And the cases that we have been made aware of in Atlanta, they were able to treat these individuals, and in some cases, you know, they're back leading a normal life, whatever normal means for them, but they're physically okay as we speak.
They are, and they received the ZMapp, the antibody that was produced for Ebola, and we're hoping to see more of that produced.
There's the critical point, more of that produced.
It is.
Because the current patient that's there at Emory, they are not going to have access to that same
Right.
medicine.
Right.
Okay, what does that mean? Why?
Well, it's just production. We in our mind think, okay, you can just make it.
Sure.
But to make it is a big deal, and scientifically, biologically, has to be controlled so there's no contamination, so that it's perfect, that assays are correct, and the actual product that comes out is what you intend for it to be. That just takes a long time. And so to be able to mass produce something like that, think about it, our flu vaccine, for instance. In order for us to make a flu vaccine, we start the year before.
Right.
So it takes a long time to make these things.
Okay, so we've got it down now that Ebola is not transferred through the air. Someone sneezing next to you on a plane who might be infected with the Ebola virus is not going to spread that virus to you unless it's body fluids that are connected.
That's
okay.
correct. Now, if they sneeze in your face with saliva, that is infectious.
Okay, okay. So the average citizen, as you say, we're a global economy. We travel the world now. Do you really need to be concerned? How should we approach this?
Knowledge is power. You know, I think it's important just to pay attention to the basics of how you can prevent any infectious disease from coming to you. You need to be healthy. That means you need to exercise, eat right, don't smoke, and take care of yourself. Take care of those around you as well. And know that it has to be secretions or blood from somebody who's infected to get you infected. If you know that, then you stay away from those. We do ask people, particularly when there is a concern of something that's contagious, if your family member or friend or loved one is in isolation in the hospital, not to visit. And if you have been around them, contain yourself to your home. Don't be going out to spread what you may be incubating as well. Those are simple, basic things, but knowledge is power. Don't panic.
Don't panic. That's so important. So as far as Ebola symptoms, what should one look for?
The case definition involves fever. You may have nausea, vomiting, or diarrhea. You ache all over, and then any amount of bleeding that can't be controlled in a patient who's had exposure to or travel to an area where Ebola is known to occur. You're not going to get it going to Iowa.
Right.
But if you have traveled to one of the endemic areas, as we call the hot zones, or you have been with someone who has traveled or returned recently from the hot zones, then you have those symptoms. It's a case definition. At that point, we look to see if they actually have it.
Well, you know, and this speaks to a much bigger issue about antibiotic resistant strains of viruses and illnesses that we're seeing now. Have we abused antibiotics?
Oh my goodness, yes. You know, we have 4 different basic categories of infections we can get. We can get TB organisms, we can get protozoans and parasites, we can get viruses, and we can get bacteria. They all are basically infections. The 2 biggest ones are viruses and bacteria, and those are the ones that are affected by our antibiotics mostly. Viruses, we don't have as many antibiotics to use, so we'd rather not use them unless we're pretty sure we need to. We'll lose them if we're not careful. The bacterial problem is out of control. The CRE or carbapenem resistant Enterobacteriaceae, as our term goes.
That's a big word.
That is, but those are resistant to everything. There is no way you can treat those infections. So if you come to us with something we can't treat, we can't treat it. And so we would like people not to use antibiotics unless they're necessary. They save lives. They're wonderful. But just to give an antibiotic because I don't feel good is not the best idea. The CDC has a Get Smart campaign, and it's a really nice website that says, cough, sniffle, sneeze, no antibiotics, please, because the common cold is not treated by antibiotics. We need to be sure of what we're doing.
We do, and yet people run very quickly to their doctors when they start sneezing and sniffling, and so the Center for Disease Control and Prevention knows what they're talking about.
They do.
They can go there. So really be choosy about when you get an antibiotic.
Yes, we are truly in an era of too many antibiotics and untreatable infections. And it's terribly important to remember that because we care about those around us, and those around us may be affected by it.
Definitely. Now, speaking about those around us being infected by it, there's something else that we're hearing about, and I want to say it correctly, enterovirus D68, and it's
correct.
affecting young people. What exactly is that?
Enterovirus is a common virus that lives innocent around us all the time. There are polio strains that are enteroviruses and non-polio strains. So the non-polio strains are the ones we see, and polio was actually caused by an enterovirus. So it's not unfamiliar to us at all. But there is a strain D68 that has caused respiratory illnesses of varying types among varying ages, but in the young have been quite serious in the United States. If you're asthma prone, more likely to have difficulty, and some of these kids, not all of them, have been on ventilators and been quite ill.
As it relates to, we're just about out of time, for our audience, if you would recap, please, because, you know, we're talking about Ebola, these antibiotic-resistant viruses and illnesses that are out there. How can we be smart as human beings?
I would say 3 things. One is your health is your responsibility. We can help you when you get in trouble, but you need to try to live healthy. The second thing is that power is knowledge. Just know how to prevent general infections from occurring. Stay home when you're sick. And then the third one is don't hesitate to protect yourself and your family with vaccines when they're available. Don't be afraid of them. They are the #1 thing that prevents disease in the United States. And those 3 simple things, I think, will make a big difference in everyone.
And so will you in what you do. Thank you so much for sharing your time. We've been talking with Dr. Rebecca Shadowin, an infectious disease and travel medicine specialist. And when we come back, are you getting enough sleep? Well, guess what? Not enough Z's can certainly affect your health. We're going to talk about that when Kentucky Outlook continues. Stay with us. Kentucky Outlook continues. I'm Barbara Deeb. As we mentioned, Dr. Phillip Bale is joining us now. The Barren County Family Physician is affiliated with Graves Gilbert Clinic and a member of the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky, as well as a member of the WKU Board of Regents. He's here today to talk about sleep. How are you sleeping? Do you get the necessary 8 hours, and is it a good quality of sleep? Let's talk about the importance of sleep and the ramifications for your health. Dr. Bale, thank you for joining us.
It's a great topic, and I'm happy to be here and happy that you're interested in it, and hopefully the viewers are too, because sleep and sleep deprivation has really become a major public health issue in America. And there are several aspects to it that are critical, not only for health, but in terms of learning and education. So there's lots of aspects to it that we can talk about if we have enough time.
Well, that's the problem, the time. But let's talk about the difference in an adolescent versus an adult. Now, I have children. My 23-year-old is running, burning the candle at both ends, and still seems to just never have enough sleep. Adolescents, we understand, need a certain amount of sleep. So age does make a difference in the amount of sleep we need.
Yeah, and we're really going to talk about the brain. And we've entered a modern golden era in terms of brain research. And much of this is brought about by our ability through technology, functional MRIs, to look at the brain, and we can actually see what areas of the brain are active when and what role they play in our health and in our learning. One of the things that we've learned in the last 15 years or so is that adolescent brains are different than ours as adults. Adolescence being defined as approximately age 12 to 23, so your son would still probably qualify as being termed an adolescent, but probably the biggest difference is that adolescents have what we call a phase shift in melatonin production, and whereas their parents are probably getting sleepy at 9 or 9:30 at night and wanting to go to sleep because their melatonin production's already in gear, adolescents don't get that melatonin surge till more like midnight or 1 o'clock, and so physiologically they are programmed or wired not to have the urge to go to sleep till much later. And when you consider the school starting times, for instance, or job starting time or whatever, being what they are, their brains don't really wake up till about 9 or 10 in the morning.
And here we're asking them to be at school at 7:30 in their seats and paying attention, right?
Well, we're asking some of them to be at the bus stop at 6:30 or whenever. So the implications for this in the educational world are legion. And if you believe much of what we read about the educational success or lack thereof of American school children today, particularly in the areas of math and science, this should be of great concern to you if you serve on a school board or a board of regents.
Or on a board of regents. Let's talk about what happens when you're sleeping, okay? You talk about the melatonin production, but some people are under the assumption that when you go to sleep, everything just sort of shuts down. Well, that can't really happen.
No, it doesn't, and that's again just a fascinating new era of understanding to realize that the brain, particularly during REM sleep, is as active or more active than our brains are right now. And so nothing could be further than the truth than the brain shuts down. Someone much smarter than I am once said that if sleep has no purpose, it has to be the greatest evolutionary mistake in the history of the world. And I think that's true. And sleep is a necessity. It's not a luxury. And we know from experiments with rats, I hate to say it, but if you put them on a treadmill that they have to keep walking on and stay awake, otherwise they fall into a pool of water and drown. After 2 weeks, they die, and in the process they develop skin ulcerations and so forth, which speaks to many of the health aspects that are now becoming so apparent and irrefutable. Sleep is necessary for our immune systems to function the way they should. If someone gets less than 5 hours sleep, they're 3 times more likely to get a cold or maybe a sinus infection. And sleep is necessary for our hormone systems in our body to function properly. Sleep deprivation is linked to a significant increase in cardiovascular disease, heart attacks and strokes, obesity and diabetes, both childhood and adult, are now clearly linked to
In what
sleep
way?
deprivation? Well, there's a couple of hormones that regulate appetite, and one is in the brain and one is in the stomach, leptin and ghrelin. And sleep deprivation does the wrong things for both of those, and actually not only increases your appetite, but it makes you crave all the wrong foods, carbohydrate craving, junk food craving.
So maybe you don't need to diet, you might just need to get some more rest. huh?
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about the quality of the sleep. You mentioned REM, rapid eye movement, and so there's quantity versus quality. And would you agree that everyone's different? Like you might require 8 hours, I can go with maybe 7.5 hours. Is that true?
Sure. There are some individual variations, and of course that varies during our lifetime. Infants need to sleep probably 16 hours a day, and younger children 10 hours, and by adolescents they need 9 hours and 15 minutes sleep a night, and most adults 7 to 8 will be adequate, again allowing for individual variations. One of the most glaring statistics today, and this is from the Kaiser Family Foundation, is that the average American teenager today is sleeping 6 hours and 15 minutes a night, whereas they need 9 hours and 15 minutes a night. If you get into the architecture of sleep, most people go through 90-minute cycles during a night, and the average person is going to have probably 4 or 5 of those. But REM sleep, which is the deep rapid eye movement sleep component of that, is when most of our memory consolidation occurs. So you're converting short-term memory to long-term memory during REM sleep. It gets even more interesting when you realize that each period of REM sleep during those 90-minute cycles gets longer and longer throughout the night. So your longest period of REM sleep is typically between the 7th and 8th hour. So if you're sleeping less than 7 hours or 6 hours, you're really robbing yourself of the time that is most important for not just learning from an academic standpoint, but it's actually muscle memory too. So this is true for athletes or guitar players or whoever. If you take a lesson one afternoon and you sleep less than 5 hours that night, you probably wasted your money and wasted your time.
Fascinating. What about sleep hygiene? Okay, so how do we get a good night's sleep? I know for sure, turn off the lights and turn off that television.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is common sense, and surprisingly, there's not a lot of good research on that, so much of what we say is anecdotal. But there are some obvious things. We know caffeine is a stimulant, we know alcohol is a stimulant, and so most people would be well served to avoid those, or particularly after noon. We know a cooler environment is more conducive to better sleep. There are many other factors, including light pollution, exposure to light, and so TVs shouldn't be in a bedroom. Cell phones, if you're an adolescent, should be checked in at a reasonable time during the night so that you're not texting friends at 11 o'clock or midnight when your brain is still going.
Right.
And exercise is also, I think, very important. People that exercise are going to be healthier in many ways, but they're much more apt to be better sleepers.
Interesting. So the public health, you're on the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky. Kentuckians in general, from your experience, is this an issue they address? Is this an issue they are aware of? Is this something that you're working to make them aware of?
I think everybody on that board would tell you that they've maybe heard too much from me about it, but as long as I'm on the board, they're going to keep hearing about it because it is a major public health issue. And if you look at the things like cardiovascular disease and diabetes and obesity, Kentucky ranks in the, however you want to look at it, top 5 or bottom 5 of the country. You know, we have some of the worst statistics of any state in the Union. We're unaffectionately known as the Coronary Valley. And so sleep deprivation has to be one of those things that we recognize plays a role in this. Stress in the world in general is high, and that certainly plays a role in many people's difficulty sleeping. So
don't lose hope, though, right? We're just about out of time. If you would recap for us, for our audience, the importance of a good night's sleep. And you might be watching this and say, I try, I can't, but you do have some good commonsensical pointers.
Yeah, I think the message is sleep is a necessity, and sleep is food for our brains. And without enough of it, we're not going to function very well in most any element of our lives. So putting greater value on it and educating the public to the importance of that is, to me, essential if we're going to move the needle. Curiously, in the world of medicine, there have been several studies that show that when something is first discovered to be clinically relevant, useful, until it becomes part of the fabric of standard of care, typically takes about 20 years.
Oh my.
And I think, you know, we will look back as educators and in the healthcare world 10 years from now and say, you know, can you believe we didn't incorporate this knowledge sooner? I think 10 years from now, school starting times for adolescents will be 8:30 or 9 o'clock. I hope so. And if we value learning as the primary goal of education, this stuff can't be ignored.
Can't be ignored, and we hope that with those pointers you're going to get a better night's sleep tonight. A very special thank you for that information. We've been talking with Dr. Phillip Bale, a family physician, and that's going to wrap it up for this week's edition of Kentucky Outlook. I'm Barbara Deeb. We're glad you joined us. Sleep well.